The Los Angeles night wrapped itself around Denzel Washington's Mercedes like a velvet cloak, streetlights catching the pristine black paint as he navigated through Beverly Hills. The digital dashboard clock read 11:43 p.m. Another late wrap on set, another quiet drive home through the winding streets of LA's most privileged neighborhoods. The actor's mind wandered to the scene he'd just finished filming, his character's lines still echoing in his thoughts when the first flash of red and blue shattered his reflection. Two LAPD cruisers materialized behind him, their presence immediately transforming the peaceful evening into something more ominous. Washington's hands instinctively moved to the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, muscle memory from countless conversations with his children about surviving police encounters kicking in. He guided his vehicle to the curb with practiced precision, each movement deliberate and calm. The officers approached with flashlights drawn, their beams harsh against his rearview mirrors. Washington noticed their stance, aggressive, hands hovering near their weapons, approaching as if expecting trouble. The lead officer's flashlight beam deliberately struck his eyes through the side mirror, a small but pointed assertion of authority. "License and registration," the first officer demanded, his tone carrying none of the professional courtesy typically reserved for Beverly Hills traffic stops. His nameplate read, Officer Morrison, and his partner, a younger officer named Rodriguez, positioned himself on the passenger side, flashlight beam scanning the car's interior with exaggerated thoroughness. Washington reached for his documents with the same measured grace he brought to his performances, maintaining a steady narrative in his head. Slow movements, clear intentions, no surprises. The registration took a moment to locate, tucked away in the glove compartment beneath some scripts. "Taking your time, aren't you?" Morrison's impatience cut through the night air. More patrol cars were arriving now, their lights transforming the quiet street into an impromptu stage, drawing curious onlookers from their million-dollar homes. Phones emerged from pockets and handbags, their small screens capturing what everyone assumed would be another viral moment of confrontation. The actor noticed a young couple across the street, the woman's hand covering her mouth in recognition, the man already live-streaming. Washington understood the script they thought they were watching. Another successful black man being reminded of his place in America's hierarchy. But he had no intention of following that narrative. "My apologies, officer," Washington replied, his voice carrying the same dignified resonance that had earned him 2 Academy Awards. "I want to ensure I'm providing exactly what you need." He handed over his license and registration with a steady hand, maintaining eye contact that conveyed respect rather than challenge. Morrison studied the documents with exaggerated scrutiny, his flashlight beam moving between the papers and Washington's face. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility. More officers arrived, their presence creating an absurd overreaction to a simple traffic stop. 7 police vehicles now lined the street, their lights painting the expensive homes in alternating red and blue. A small crowd had gathered, their whispers carrying across the night air. "That's Denzel Washington," someone said, loud enough for the officers to hear. Morrison's posture shifted slightly, the first crack in his authoritative facade. Rodriguez, the younger officer, looked at his partner with sudden uncertainty. "Do you know why we stopped you?" Morrison pressed on, trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly shifting beneath his feet. "No, sir, I don't," Washington replied, his tone remaining measured, professional. "I'd appreciate knowing what concerned you about my driving." The response was perfectly calibrated, neither submissive nor challenging, maintaining his dignity while acknowledging the officer's authority. The gathering crowd had grown, their phones recording every moment, every word. But Washington's focus remained entirely on the officers before him, understanding that this moment could either escalate into headlines or transform into something more meaningful. The choice, he knew, rested largely with him. As Morrison began explaining a vague violation about crossing the yellow line, Washington noticed something in the younger officer's eyes. Recognition, not just of his celebrity, but of the absurdity of the situation. 7 police cars for a minor traffic violation, a spotlight of public attention growing by the second, and at the center of it all, one of Hollywood's most respected actors, maintaining a masterclass in dignity under pressure. The night air hummed with tension. The scene balanced on a knife's edge between confrontation and conversation. In this moment, Washington made a choice that would shape everything that followed. A choice not just about how to handle this situation, but about what message to send to every phone recording, every officer watching, and every person who would later hear this story. The first chapter of this unexpected drama was about to take a turn that none of the participants could have anticipated. The growing crowd of onlookers created an amphitheater of sorts, their presence adding layers of complexity to an already charged situation. Officer Morrison's jaw tightened as he became increasingly aware of the audience, his authority now under the scrutiny of dozens of recording devices. The flashing lights continued their rhythmic dance across manicured lawns and luxury vehicles, creating an almost surreal backdrop for the unfolding drama. "Step out of the vehicle," Morrison commanded, his voice carrying an edge that suggested he was trying to regain control of a situation rapidly spinning beyond his grasp. Washington observed the officer's body language, the slightly widened stance, the hand resting more firmly on his weapon. The signs of a man feeling his authority challenged not by resistance, but by composure. Washington complied with deliberate grace, each movement carefully choreographed to telegraph peace. As he emerged from the Mercedes, his full height and presence became apparent. Even in casual clothes after a long day of filming, he carried himself with the gravitas that had become his trademark both on and off screen. "Hands where we can see them," Rodriguez called out, his younger voice betraying a mixture of uncertainty and protocol-driven authority. Washington kept his hands visible, maintained a dignified posture, and smiled. Not the practiced smile of a celebrity, but the genuine expression of someone who recognized a teaching moment in the making. More whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "That's Malcolm X you're harassing." Another voice added, "Show some respect." The tension in the air thickened, threatening to transform this traffic stop into exactly the kind of confrontational narrative that dominated news cycles and social media feeds. But Washington had lived through too many decades, played too many roles, and understood too deeply the power of choices in crucial moments to let this situation devolve into another tragic headline. Instead of feeding into the growing anger of the crowd, he turned his full attention to Morrison. "Officer," he began, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby but maintaining an intimate tone that made the conversation feel personal. "I understand you're doing your job. That's important work, and it comes with real pressures and risks. What would you like to discuss about my driving?" The unexpected response, acknowledging the officer's position while maintaining his own dignity, created a subtle shift in the dynamic. Morrison's hand moved slightly away from his weapon, though his posture remained rigid. "You were weaving in your lane," he stated, the words coming out less confidently than before. "I appreciate you looking out for public safety," Washington replied, his response transforming what could have been a confrontation into a dialogue. "I've been filming all day and perhaps I was more tired than I realized. Would you like to discuss this further, or would you prefer to administer any sobriety tests you feel are necessary?" The crowd had grown quieter, phones still recording, but their owners now caught up in witnessing something unexpected. Not a confrontation between authority and celebrity, but a masterclass in de-escalation and human dignity. Rodriguez, the younger officer, stepped slightly forward, his face showing the internal struggle between trained protocol and growing respect. More police had arrived, bringing the total to 9 vehicles, their lights creating an almost festive atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the serious nature of the moment. An LAPD supervisor's car pulled up, its arrival suggesting that word had traveled about exactly who had been pulled over in Beverly Hills. Washington noticed another dynamic developing. Some officers in the growing police presence were black, their faces carrying the complex emotions of witnessing this scene. He understood that this moment wasn't just about him and Morrison anymore. It was about patterns, perceptions, and the possibility of change. A news van pulled up at the end of the street, drawn by the police lights and social media buzz that had already begun spreading across Los Angeles. Washington knew the next few minutes would determine whether tomorrow's headlines would scream about confrontation or whisper about transformation. The tension had reached its peak, like a wire pulled too tight, humming with potential energy. But instead of snapping, that tension was about to transform into something entirely unexpected. Something that would challenge assumptions on all sides and create ripples far beyond this Beverly Hills street. The arrival of the LAPD supervisor, Captain Sarah Chen, marked a subtle shift in the atmosphere. She emerged from her vehicle with the careful neutrality of someone walking into a potential powder keg, her experience evident in every measured movement. Washington recognized in her approach the same careful calculation he'd been employing, the awareness that every gesture, every word, carried weight beyond the moment. "Officers!" Chen called out, her voice carrying authority without aggression. "What's the situation here?" Before Morrison could respond, Washington seized the opportunity to reshape the narrative. "Captain," he addressed her with warm professionalism, "your officers are showing appropriate concern for public safety. We're having a discussion about my driving, which they felt warranted investigation." The strategic generosity of his characterization wasn't lost on anyone present. Morrison's stance shifted again, caught between his initial aggressive approach and Washington's persistent dignity. The actor's refusal to escalate, to paint himself as a victim, or to leverage his celebrity status, had effectively disarmed the situation's most volatile elements. Rodriguez, the younger officer, finally found his voice. "Sir," he addressed Washington directly, "I want you to know, my father uses your films in his community youth program. The scene in Remember the Titans where you talk about respect," he trailed off, professional protocol warring with personal admiration. Washington seized this moment of genuine connection. "Tell me about this program," he encouraged, deliberately including Morrison and Chen in the conversation with his body language. As Rodriguez described his father's work with at-risk youth, the entire mood of the scene began to transform. The gathering crowd witnessed something remarkable, a potential confrontation metamorphosing into a conversation about community policing, mentorship, and the power of positive representation. Washington shared stories from his own experiences, not as a celebrity dispensing wisdom from above, but as someone who understood the complexities of both sides of this interaction. "You know," Washington said, addressing all the officers present, "every role I've played, whether it's a cop or a criminal, a leader or a follower, has taught me something about perspective, about how we see each other, and how those perceptions shape our interactions." Captain Chen, recognizing the unique opportunity this moment presented, added her own perspective. "This is exactly the kind of dialogue we need more of," she observed, "not just when cameras are rolling, but in every interaction." Morrison, who had remained largely silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. His voice carried a different tone now, less defensive, more reflective. "Mr. Washington," he began, "I came at this situation with certain assumptions. I need to acknowledge that." The crowd had grown quieter, phones lowering as people realized they were witnessing something more meaningful than a viral confrontation. The news van's crew, who had been preparing to broadcast live, found themselves capturing a story very different from what they'd expected. Washington turned to Morrison with genuine interest. "Tell me about those assumptions," he encouraged, "not to judge them, but to understand them, because that's where change begins." This invitation to dialogue, offered without accusation or defensiveness, opened the door to a conversation about bias, fear, and the possibility of growth. What followed was an impromptu discussion about police-community relations, conducted with a level of honesty rarely seen in public spaces. Washington shared his own experiences of being profiled, not with bitterness but with a desire to illuminate. Officers shared their perspectives on fear and split-second decisions. The gathered crowd, still recording but now with a different purpose, witnessed a masterclass in human connection. The news crew, initially poised to capture conflict, found themselves documenting something far more newsworthy, a moment of genuine transformation, where confrontation gave way to conversation and assumptions yielded to understanding. The following days saw the incident transform from a potential scandal into a catalyst for change. News outlets that had initially prepared to run inflammatory headlines instead found themselves exploring a more nuanced narrative. Social media clips of the encounter went viral, not for their confrontational content, but for the remarkable way Washington had transformed a tense situation into an opportunity for growth. Local police departments requested the footage for training purposes, recognizing in Washington's approach a masterclass in de-escalation and human dignity. The actor received countless requests for interviews about the incident, but chose instead to direct attention toward community policing initiatives and programs that built bridges between law enforcement and the communities they served. Officer Morrison and Rodriguez found themselves at the center of departmental discussions about approach and perception. Rather than facing criticism, they were praised for their willingness to engage in honest dialogue once the situation shifted. Morrison, in particular, demonstrated remarkable courage in acknowledging his initial biases publicly. Captain Chen implemented new training protocols based on the incident, incorporating elements of the discussion into the department's community relations programs. The video of Washington's measured responses and thoughtful engagement became a teaching tool, demonstrating how composure and dignity could transform potentially volatile situations. The young couple who had initially started streaming the encounter were interviewed by local news. "We thought we were about to document another tragedy," the woman explained. "Instead, we witnessed something revolutionary, not in its drama, but in its humanity." Washington himself refused to sensationalize the encounter. When finally pressed for comment at a film premiere weeks later, he simply stated, "Every moment carries the potential for conflict or connection. The choice often lies not in the situation, but in our response to it." The incident sparked a series of community forums in Los Angeles, bringing together police officers and residents for honest discussions about perception, bias, and the possibility of change. Rodriguez's father's youth program received increased attention and funding, expanding its reach to more communities. Perhaps most significantly, the encounter became a reference point for both law enforcement and civil rights activists, an example of how dignity, respect, and willingness to engage in genuine dialogue could transform seemingly intractable situations. It demonstrated that real change often begins not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but with individual choices to rise above immediate reactions and seek deeper understanding. The story concluded not with headlines or viral moments, but with quiet, lasting impact, a testament to the power of choosing wisdom over reaction, dignity over defensiveness, and understanding over assumption. In the end, what could have been another tragic example of racial profiling became instead a blueprint for transformation, proving that even in the most charged moments, there exists the possibility of growth, understanding, and positive change.